I didn't know a relationship could end not with a scream, but with the sound of glass hitting the wall. I had just come home from a casual dinner with friends. Nothing wild, nothing secret, just a normal evening, laughing over shared plates, talking about work, pretending life was simple for a few hours. When I opened the door, he was already there, standing by the entrance, my phone in his hand. The look on his face wasn't angry. It wasn't even emotional. It was cold, calculated, like a verdict had already been decided. "Who is Rachel?" he asked. My stomach dropped. Rachel was a coworker, married, 3 kids, the kind of woman who sent polite messages about deadlines and meeting times. That was it. Nothing hidden, nothing inappropriate. But he didn't want an explanation. He held my phone up like evidence in a courtroom and pointed to a single smiley face at the end of her text. "So you're flirting now?" he said. I barely had time to answer before the phone left his hand. It hit the wall and shattered. The screen split clean down the middle, and in that moment, staring at the broken glass scattered across my apartment floor, something inside me cracked too. Because this wasn't really about Rachel. It never was. It was about control. For 2 years, I had slowly learned how to speak carefully, how to soften my tone, how to avoid mentioning women at work, how to keep my phone face down, how to explain myself before I was even accused. I told myself this was love, that jealousy meant he cared, that intensity meant passion. But standing there, barefoot on the floor, my phone destroyed because of a smiley face, I realized how wrong I'd been. Then he looked at me and said the words that finally made everything clear. "If you don't propose to me within the next month, I'll assume you're cheating." No discussion, no conversation, just an ultimatum. I didn't answer him right away. I just stared at the broken screen and thought, is this really the future I'm supposed to lock myself into? Because something inside me already knew. This wasn't love, this was a warning. I need to rewind, because if you only saw the ending, you'd think it came out of nowhere. I'm 29. I work a steady corporate job that keeps my brain busy and my calendar packed. Deadlines, meetings, performance reviews, the constant pressure to be on. I'm the kind of woman who likes routines. I like knowing where my keys are. I like plans. I like stability. And that's why, when I met Lisa, 25, bold, magnetic, the type who walked into a room like she owned oxygen, I mistook chaos for chemistry. We met during my last semester of completing my MBA. I used to study most evenings at the campus coffee shop because my apartment felt too quiet and my brain worked better with background noise. Lisa worked behind the counter. At first, it was just small talk, her remembering my usual order, slipping an extra shot of espresso into my cup with a playful look, teasing me about always having 5 tabs open on my laptop like my life depended on it. Then one night, after weeks of this, she surprised me. She leaned on the counter, smiled like she'd already decided something, and said, "So, are you going to keep coming in here and staring at spreadsheets forever, or are you going to give me your number?" It was forward, confident, almost funny. And I, who normally needed time, who normally overthought, gave it to her. Our first date wasn't fancy. We walked in a park and talked until the streetlights turned on. Lisa told stories with her whole face, hands moving, eyes bright, laugh loud enough that strangers smiled at us. She made me feel seen in a way that was addictive, like my life could be more than work and responsibility. That first month was intense. She texted constantly throughout the day. Good morning messages, selfies, little "I miss you" notes that landed in my inbox like tiny fireworks. She would show up with lunch at my internship. She wanted every evening together, every weekend planned, every free moment filled with her. And physically, we were on fire. It felt like we couldn't keep our hands off each other, like being close to her erased stress, like I'd finally found someone who wanted me as much as I wanted to be wanted. 1 month in, she told me she loved me. It was fast, so fast it should have scared me. But I told myself, some people just know. And I didn't want to be the cautious woman who ruins something good by overanalyzing it. Around the 6-month mark, the first cracks showed. If I mentioned a female classmate, Lisa would ask questions. Too many, too sharp. Who is she? How long have you known her? Do you think she's pretty? Has she ever tried anything with you? At first, I laughed it off, like it was harmless, like it was flirting with an edge. But the questions didn't stop. They multiplied. And slowly, without even realizing it, I started editing myself. I stopped mentioning women from class. I avoided saying names. I shortened stories. I learned to keep conversations smooth, predictable, because anything could become fuel. By our 1 year anniversary, Lisa moved into my apartment. She said she hated her roommates. She was between jobs. It made sense financially, she said, and I wanted to be supportive. I wanted to believe this was the normal progression of a serious relationship. The very first night after she moved in, she reorganized my entire apartment while I was at work. When I came home, I couldn't find anything. My shelves looked emptied. My small collection of sports memorabilia, things I'd kept since college, pieces of my own history, was boxed up and shoved into a closet. She shrugged and said, "It looks childish." I remember standing there, keys still in my hand, and feeling something small but sharp inside me. Not rage, not a fight. Just a question I didn't know how to voice yet. When did loving someone start to feel like disappearing? And I wish I could say I confronted it right then. But I didn't. I smiled. I swallowed it. I told myself, this is what compromise looks like. And that was the beginning of how I learned to live with things that weren't okay, until the night my phone shattered against the wall made it impossible to pretend anymore. Looking back, the warning signs weren't loud. They were quiet, persistent, the kind that sink in slowly until they feel normal. After Lisa moved in, the jealousy didn't disappear. It evolved. At first, it was subtle. She'd glance at my phone when it lit up. Not obvious enough to accuse, but not innocent either. If I was texting, she'd lean in just a little too close, her eyes flicking to the screen before meeting mine with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Who's that?" she'd ask casually. If I answered too quickly, she'd raise an eyebrow. If I answered too vaguely, she'd ask follow-up questions. There was no right answer. Around the same time, my world began to shrink. I stopped going out with friends as often. Not because she forbade it, but because it was easier not to deal with the aftermath. If I went out, my phone would buzz every 15 minutes. "Where are you? Who are you with? When will you be home?" If I didn't reply fast enough, she'd call. Again and again. Sometimes my phone would vibrate nonstop until I stepped outside just to reassure her I wasn't doing anything wrong. My friends noticed. They joked about it, called her protective, teased me about being on a short leash. I laughed along, even though something about it made my chest feel tight. I told myself she just cared deeply, that this was what commitment looked like. The irony was that while my interactions were under constant surveillance, hers were not. About 18 months in, Lisa landed a new job at a marketing firm. She was proud of it, and I was proud of her too. But almost immediately, her phone became an extension of her hand. Notifications lit up constantly. If I asked who she was talking to, she'd turn away slightly, angling the screen out of my view. "Work stuff," she'd say. But the secrecy was new and unsettling. What changed even more abruptly was our physical relationship. After over a year of regular intimacy, it almost completely stopped. At first, I thought it was stress, new job, long hours, adjustment. I tried to be patient, tried not to take it personally. But weeks turned into months. Every time I reached for her, she'd pull away. "I'm tired. I'm not in the mood. Can we not right now?" When I finally really asked, what was going on, her answer blindsided me. She told me she had been reflecting on her values and decided she wanted to wait until marriage to have sex again. I remember sitting there, stunned. We weren't teenagers. We'd been intimate for over a year. Nothing about our relationship had changed, except her sudden distance. But she said it with such certainty, like this was a moral decision I was supposed to respect without question. And from that moment on, marriage became her favorite word. It came up constantly. "When are you planning to propose? Have you started looking at rings? Don't you think we'd be happier if we were married?" Every time I tried to talk about our trust issues, she redirected the conversation. "Marriage will fix this. Once we're married, I won't feel so insecure. Commitment will solve everything." At the same time, her control over my communication intensified. She didn't just glance at my phone anymore. She took it. At first, it was under harmless excuses. Hers was dead, she needed to make a call. But I'd noticed later that messages had been opened, notifications cleared. Eventually, she stopped pretending. She'd pick up my phone whenever she wanted, scrolling openly, questioning names, asking why someone reacted to a message, why an emoji was used. The moment that really shook me was when I realized she had started opening my Snapchats before I even saw them. I missed messages from my own group chats because she'd already dismissed them. When I confronted her, she didn't apologize. She said, "I have a right to know who's talking to you." And in that moment, a thought crept in that I couldn't ignore anymore. Why does someone who demands so much transparency hide her own phone like it's a locked vault? I didn't know it yet, but the imbalance, the double standards, The constant erosion of my boundaries were planting the seeds for something far worse. And they were about to sprout. The night everything finally came into focus didn't start dramatically. It was ordinary, which somehow made it worse. I had gone out to a casual dinner with a few friends from work. Nothing secretive, nothing late night. Just a shared meal, laughter, stories about office politics, and weekend plans. I checked my phone a couple of times, replied when I could, and enjoyed the rare feeling of being present without constantly scanning my words. When I got home, the apartment was too quiet. The lights were on, the air felt tense. Lisa was standing by the front door, not sitting, not pacing, standing, like she'd been waiting for a cue. My phone was in her hand. The moment our eyes met, I knew something was wrong. Her face was blank in a way that scared me more than anger ever could. No tears, no raised voice, just a tight jaw and eyes that looked past me instead of at me. "Who is Rachel?" she asked. It took me a second to understand what she was referring to. Rachel was a coworker, married, a mother of 3, someone who texted me about project deadlines and meeting times. That night, she'd sent a short message asking to move a meeting, ending it with a simple smiley face. That was it. I opened my mouth to explain, but Lisa didn't let me finish. She held the phone up between us, pointing at the screen like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Why is she using emojis with you?" she demanded. I felt that familiar knot tighten in my chest, the one that always appeared right before I started defending myself for things I hadn't done. I tried to keep my voice calm. "She's a coworker," I said. "She's married. This is about work." Lisa laughed softly. Not humor, not disbelief. Mockery. "Do you really think I'm that stupid?" she asked. Before I could react, she threw my phone. Not gently, not impulsively. With intention. It slammed against the wall and shattered, pieces of glass scattering across the floor like something inside me had finally broken free. For a moment, neither of us moved. I stared at the wreckage. My screen split clean down the middle, notifications frozen in time, a physical manifestation of how fractured things had become. My hands were shaking, but my voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. "That was my phone," I said quietly. Lisa crossed her arms. "If you didn't have anything to hide, I wouldn't need to check it," she replied. That sentence hit harder than the phone hitting the wall, because it rewrote reality. It turned her violation into my fault. I bent down and picked up the broken phone, glass biting into my palm. The pain grounded me. I looked up at her and asked, "When did you decide I wasn't trustworthy?" Her expression hardened. Then she said it. The ultimatum. "If you don't propose to me within the next month," she said, "I'll assume you're cheating, and I'm done." No conversation, no accountability, just a demand dressed up as a solution. Marriage as a cure. A ring as proof of innocence. I stared at her, realizing something terrifying. This wasn't about love or commitment. It was about control. She believed a proposal would lock me in. That marriage would justify her behavior. That once I was legally bound to her, her suspicion would finally feel reasonable. And for the first time since we met, I felt something shift. Not fear, not confusion. Clarity. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said, "I need some space." Lisa scoffed. "Running away won't fix anything." But as I lay on the couch that night, staring at the ceiling, while my phone lay dead on the table, I knew something irreversible had happened. The illusion was gone. And no matter what I chose next, stay or leave, our relationship would never look the same again. That night, I didn't sleep in the bed we shared. I lay on the couch, the broken phone resting on the coffee table like a quiet accusation. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it shattering again, felt the sound vibrate through my bones. Not because of the phone itself, but because of what it represented. Something sacred had been crossed. Lisa went to bed without another word, as if throwing my phone and issuing an ultimatum were just another argument we'd smooth over in the morning. That hurt more than her anger ever could. It told me she didn't see what she'd done as wrong, just necessary. I stared at the ceiling and replayed the last 2 years in my head. The questions, the checking, the constant need to reassure her that I wasn't doing anything wrong. When had I stopped feeling like myself? I realized I'd been living in a state of low-grade anxiety for months, measuring every sentence before speaking, rehearsing explanations before they were even needed. I had learned to preempt suspicion instead of expecting trust. And the worst part? I'd started to blame myself. Maybe I hadn't been reassuring enough. Maybe I'd worked too much. Maybe if I'd proposed sooner, she wouldn't feel so insecure. Those thoughts came automatically, like reflexes trained over time. But lying there in the quiet, something inside me pushed back. Is love supposed to feel like this? The next morning, I woke up stiff and exhausted. Lisa was already gone, off to work, apparently unconcerned. On the counter, she'd left a sticky note that said, "We need to talk tonight." My chest tightened when I read it. That sentence used to mean reconciliation, apologies, promises. Now it felt like a threat. I spent the day going through the motions at work, my mind elsewhere. I borrowed an old phone from a colleague to stay reachable, but every vibration made my stomach drop. I replayed conversations in my head, trying to prepare for whatever version of Lisa would come home that evening. The crying one, the angry one, or the charming one who acted like nothing had happened. When she finally walked through the door, she was smiling. Too much. She set takeout from my favorite restaurant on the table and said, "I thought we could just relax tonight." That was her pattern. Blow up, cross a line, then pretend normalcy could erase it. I didn't sit down. "We need to talk," I said. Her smile faltered. I told her everything I'd been holding in for months, carefully, calmly. I talked about the phone checking, the constant accusations, the double standard between my friendships and hers, how small I'd begun to feel in my own home. For a moment, she just stared at me. Then she cried, big, shaking sobs that pulled at every instinct I had to comfort her. She said she had trust issues, that her ex had cheated, that she was scared of losing me. She promised she'd try harder. She suggested couples counseling. For a split second, I almost gave in. Then she added, "But I still need to know you're serious. A proposal would make me feel secure." And that's when I knew. She wasn't hearing me. She was negotiating. She wanted change on my part, commitment as leverage, marriage as a solution to problems she refused to take responsibility for. I told her I couldn't do this anymore, that I didn't believe marriage would fix control, that love couldn't exist without trust, that I was exhausted. Her tears dried instantly. Her voice turned sharp. "So who is she?" she snapped. "Rachel or someone else?" No matter what I said, she twisted it, rewrote the story until I became the villain. By the end of the conversation, she was convinced I was leaving her for another woman. The next day, she packed most of her things. She said she'd stay with a friend for a while. When the door closed behind her, the apartment fell silent. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. But I had no idea yet that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of how far she was willing to go when she lost control. The silence after Lisa left felt deceptive. At first, it was peaceful, too peaceful. The apartment echoed in a way I wasn't used to. Empty corners, missing objects, drawers half cleared. I noticed small absences everywhere, her shoes by the door gone, her mug missing from the sink, the faint smell of her perfume already fading. I told myself this was good, necessary. Then my phone started lighting up. At first, it was just a few texts, short, emotionally charged, swinging wildly between anger and regret. "You didn't even try. I gave you everything. I can't believe you'd throw us away like this. Please, we need to talk." I didn't respond. I needed distance. I needed my nervous system to settle before I said something I'd regret. But Lisa didn't understand boundaries, especially when she felt them closing in. By the next morning, the messages multiplied. Missed calls stacked up while I was in meetings. My assistant eventually stopped putting them through after Lisa called my office repeatedly, demanding to speak to me as my partner. That phrase, "my partner," made my stomach turn. That evening, she showed up at my apartment without warning. I was cooking dinner when the knock came, sharp, impatient. When I opened the door, she was standing there, eyes glassy, breath smelling faintly of alcohol. "I just want to talk," she said, pushing past me before I could answer. I told myself it was better to let her in than cause a scene in the hallway. That was a mistake. The moment she stepped inside, she started looking around, opening drawers, glancing at my laptop, flipping through papers on my desk. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Looking," she replied flatly. "I know there's someone else." I told her to stop, told her this was over, told her she needed to leave. She laughed. Then she grabbed my new phone, the replacement for the one she'd broken, and locked herself in the bathroom. I stood outside the door, heart pounding, and said the words I never thought I'd have to say to someone I once loved. "If you don't come out right now, I'm calling the police." The door opened slowly. She threw the phone back at me and said, "This isn't over." After that, everything escalated faster than I expected. The next day, she sent a long email, pages of accusations. She cataloged every argument we'd ever had, every moment she felt slighted, rewriting history until I barely recognized the relationship she described. The email ended with her offering forgiveness if I admitted my mistakes and asked her to come back. I didn't reply. Instead, I told her I'd pack the rest of her belongings and have a friend present when she picked them up. I didn't trust her alone with me anymore. When she came that Saturday, she was cold but controlled. She barely spoke, loading boxes into her friend's car. As she was leaving, she handed me an envelope. Inside was a receipt. She'd already booked and paid for couples counseling, scheduled for the following week. I handed it back to her and said, "We're done." That night, she posted a vague message on social media about betrayal and fake people. Within hours, mutual friends started texting me, confused and concerned. I kept my response simple. We broke up. It's complicated. But Lisa didn't keep it vague for long. By the next day, I learned she'd started telling people I cheated. Not just generally. Specifically, she named Rachel, my married coworker, the woman whose innocent text had started all of this. One friend forwarded me screenshots. Lisa claimed she had proof that I'd been emotionally involved with Rachel for months. None of it was true. And for a moment, I was furious. I wanted to defend myself, to correct the story, to expose her behavior. But then something surprising happened. People who really knew me didn't believe her. They asked questions. They noticed the inconsistencies. They remembered how controlling she'd been at gatherings, how she hovered, how tense things felt around her. The ones who believed her without asking drifted away quietly. And I let them. I changed the locks on my apartment after the concierge mentioned he'd seen Lisa in the building while I wasn't home. That night, I went out with friends for the first time in months without checking my phone every few minutes. I laughed. I stayed present. I felt light in a way I'd forgotten was possible. But the escalation didn't stop there. Because while Lisa was accusing me of cheating, she was still hiding something of her own. And soon, the truth, pieces of it at least, would start coming out from places I never expected. The hardest part wasn't the rumors. It wasn't even the lies. It was the quiet moments afterward, when the adrenaline wore off and I was left alone with the aftermath of everything I'd normalized for far too long. Some nights I'd come home and sit in the dark, not turning on a single light. The apartment felt different now, larger, emptier, like it was waiting for me to figure out who I was without constantly being monitored. That should have felt freeing. Instead, it felt terrifying. Because once the chaos stopped, the questions started. How did I let this happen? Why didn't I leave sooner? Was I really that blind? I replayed conversations in my head, dissecting every compromise I'd made, every time I'd softened my words to avoid conflict, every friendship I'd let fade because it was easier than fighting, every boundary I'd redrawn until it barely existed. And the guilt crept in. Not guilt for leaving her, guilt for staying, for convincing myself that love was supposed to hurt a little, that jealousy was flattering, that walking on eggshells was maturity. I started sleeping poorly. I'd wake up with my jaw clenched, heart racing, reaching for my phone instinctively, only to remember there was no one demanding updates anymore. Sometimes that realization brought relief. Other times it brought panic. I wondered if she was right, if I really had led her on, if my refusal to propose meant I was commitment phobic, if I'd wasted her time. Those thoughts were hardest to silence in the early mornings, when the city was still quiet and my mind was loud. Then, one afternoon, I ran into Kelly, Lisa's former roommate. We crossed paths at a coffee shop near my office. She hesitated when she saw me, then offered a small, tentative smile. We talked awkwardly at first, surface-level things, work, weather, life after breakups. Then Kelly sighed and said, "I wasn't sure if I should say anything, Misson, but I think you deserve to know." What she told me knocked the air out of my lungs. Lisa hadn't just kissed another guy while dating her ex, Jason. She'd had a months-long affair with Jason's close friend. It had only come out when the friend's girlfriend found messages and contacted Jason directly. Lisa had minimized everything afterward, telling people it was one mistake, one drunken moment. Kelly looked genuinely apologetic as she spoke. She did the same things with him, Kelly said quietly, checking his phone, accusing him constantly, and all the while, she was the one cheating. The room felt too small. Suddenly, the jealousy made sense. The projection, the obsession, the constant need to control the narrative. I walked back to my office afterward feeling hollow, because the truth was worse than betrayal. It meant she'd been accusing me of the very thing she was capable of doing herself. That night I cried, not because I missed her, but because I doubted myself for so long. Because I'd let someone else's insecurity convince me I was doing something wrong just by existing as myself. I thought that was the bottom. I was wrong. A few days later, I got a text from an unknown number. It was from Jake, the coworker Lisa used to have lunch with, the one she always said was just a friend. He asked if we could meet, said there was something I needed to know. I almost said no, but something in my gut told me this conversation mattered. We met in a public cafe. Jake looked uncomfortable, like he'd been rehearsing his words for days. He showed me messages, flirtatious, late night, intimate in ways that crossed lines, even if they never became physical. The timestamps lined up perfectly with when Lisa had cut off intimacy with me, with when she'd suddenly decided she wanted to wait until marriage. She'd told him I was emotionally distant, that I wasn't interested anymore, that she felt lonely. None of it was true. As Jake talked, something inside me finally settled. The doubt, the self-blame, the endless what if I'd done something differently. I hadn't imagined the imbalance, I hadn't caused her behavior, and I hadn't failed her. But knowing that didn't bring relief right away. It brought grief. For the woman I was before I learned to question my own reality. For the time I couldn't get back. And for the version of myself who thought love meant shrinking. That was my lowest point. Not because I wanted her back, but because I had to rebuild trust, not in someone else, but in myself. The shift didn't happen all at once. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic the way breakups are portrayed in movies. There was no single moment where I stood taller or felt instantly healed. It happened quietly, through clarity. After meeting Jake, I went home and sat on the floor of my living room, back against the couch, messages spread out on my coffee table like pieces of a puzzle I'd finally finished assembling. Everything lined up. The sudden withdrawal of intimacy, the obsession with my phone, the constant accusations, the push for marriage as a solution instead of accountability. None of it was random, and that realization did something powerful. It took the weight off my chest. For weeks, I'd been walking around with this unspoken fear that maybe I had provoked her behavior, that if I'd been more reassuring, more romantic, more decisive, things would have turned out differently. But staring at those messages, I understood the truth. You cannot love someone into respecting you. That night, I blocked Lisa everywhere. Phone, email, social media. Every digital door she might try to push open, I closed. It felt terrifying at first, like cutting a lifeline. Then it felt peaceful. The next step was harder. I had to protect myself. I drafted a short, formal message with the help of a lawyer friend. It was calm, direct, non-emotional. It stated that any further contact would be considered harassment. I sent it once. Then I didn't engage again. A few days later, I ran into Rachel at work. I dreaded the conversation, but she approached me gently and said she'd received a message from Lisa accusing her of having an affair with me. Rachel apologized for something she hadn't done. She said she'd dealt with a jealous ex before and recognized the pattern immediately. We agreed to keep our communication strictly professional, not because we'd done anything wrong, but because neither of us wanted to feed someone else's delusion. That moment reminded me how grounding reality can be when you step out of someone else's distorted version of it. As the weeks passed, I started reclaiming small pieces of myself. I went golfing with friends and left my phone in the car. I stayed out late without checking the time. I laughed without bracing for consequences. Each normal moment felt like an act of rebellion. Then something unexpected happened. I received an email from Lisa. I didn't open it right away. When I finally did, it wasn't an accusation. It was an apology. Not perfect, not dramatic, but real. She admitted her jealousy, her control, her dishonesty about Jake. She acknowledged her past patterns and said she was in therapy, trying to understand why she sabotaged relationships. She didn't ask to get it back together. She didn't ask to meet. She simply said she was sorry and that she would respect my space. I read the email 3 times. Then I replied with one sentence. "Thank you for acknowledging your behavior. I wish you well." And that was it. I didn't feel victorious. I felt complete, because closure didn't come from her apology. It came from my boundaries. I realized that strength isn't loud. It doesn't need witnesses. Sometimes it looks like silence, like choosing not to engage, like trusting yourself again. I stopped checking my phone for messages that weren't coming. I stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen. And slowly my life expanded again. I wasn't defined by what she said about me or what I'd endured. I was defined by what I chose next. And for the first time in a long time, I chose myself. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unfolded slowly, quietly, like truth tends to do when no one is forcing it into the spotlight. I didn't announce my side of the story. I didn't post receipts. I didn't defend myself in group chats or comment sections. I stayed silent, and that silence did more than any argument ever could. At first, some people believed Lisa. The version of events she told was simple and dramatic. I'd strung her along, refused to commit, then left her for someone at work. It was neat, emotional, easy to digest. But lies like that require constant maintenance. Truth doesn't. As weeks passed, the cracks began to show. People noticed how her stories shifted depending on who she was talking to, how details didn't line up, how the other woman was always unnamed, until suddenly she wasn't. And when Rachel's name came up, it didn't make sense. Married, kids, no history, no motive. Mutual friends started reaching out, not aggressively, not accusingly, but with curiosity. What actually happened? Are you okay? This doesn't sound like you. I answered calmly when asked. I didn't trash Lisa. I didn't dramatize anything. I simply stated facts. Over time, people made their own judgments. And slowly, quietly, Lisa's social circle shrank. Not because I pushed anyone away from her, but because patterns don't stay hidden forever. Those who had dated her before began to recognize familiar behaviors. Friends recalled moments they'd brushed off before, how controlling she could be, how intense, how quick she was to accuse. Her credibility eroded without me lifting a finger. Meanwhile, my life stabilized. Work became a place of focus again, not anxiety. I was promoted into a role with more responsibility, something I realized I might have turned down before, worried it would trigger more accusations about time and attention. My friendships deepened. The people who stayed showed up consistently. No gossip, no pressure to pick sides, just support. One night, a friend said something that stuck with me. "You seem lighter," she said, "like you're not bracing for impact anymore." She was right. I hadn't realized how much emotional energy I'd spent anticipating someone else's reactions until I stopped. As for Lisa, I heard things through the grapevine. She struggled after the breakup, jumped between narratives, between anger and victimhood, between blaming me and blaming herself. She lost friends, not dramatically, but through quiet distance. Invitations stopped coming. Messages went unanswered. The people who stayed were the ones who thrived on chaos. She never confronted me again. Never demanded explanations, never asked for another chance. The apology email was the last direct communication we had, and I kept it that way. One afternoon, months later, I ran into someone who knew us both. They hesitated before speaking, then said, "You know, I used to think you were the problem." I nodded. "And now?" I asked. They shrugged. "Now I see it." That was enough. I didn't need public vindication. I needed peace, and I had it. I rearranged my apartment, literally and emotionally. The shelves came back. The pieces of my life that had been boxed away were visible again, not as rebellion, but as restoration. I adopted a dog, something Lisa had always opposed, a 3-year-old shepherd mix with anxious eyes and endless loyalty. Caring for him grounded me, gave me routine without surveillance, companionship without conditions. Most importantly, I trusted myself again. I stopped questioning my instincts, stopped minimizing discomfort, stopped confusing intensity with intimacy. Lisa's influence faded, not because I erased the past, but because I learned from it. And while her version of the story slowly collapsed under its own contradictions, mine simply moved forward, quietly, steadily, whole. Healing didn't arrive in a dramatic moment. There was no sudden realization where everything made sense and the pain disappeared. Instead, it came in small, ordinary ways. Days where I forgot to check my phone, nights where I fell asleep without replaying old arguments, mornings where my chest felt light instead of tight. Life didn't become perfect, but it became mine again. 6 months after the breakup, I looked around my apartment and realized something quietly powerful. I felt safe here, not just physically, but emotionally. No tension, no second guessing, no need to explain myself for existing. I started dating again, casually, nothing intense, nothing rushed. And what struck me most was how different it felt. There were no interrogations, no phone checks, no pressure to prove loyalty with grand gestures. Just respect. And that changed how I defined love. I used to think passion meant intensity, that jealousy meant importance, that being needed meant being valued. Now I know better. Real love doesn't monitor, it doesn't threaten. It doesn't demand proof. Real love gives you room to breathe. Looking back, I don't hate Lisa. I don't wish her harm. I hope therapy helps her. I hope she learns to build relationships that don't rely on fear and control. But her healing is no longer my responsibility. Mine is. What I do feel is gratitude for the clarity that came before things went further. Before a ring, before legal ties. Before I mistook control for commitment, and locked myself into a life that would have shrunk me even more. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to take away from this, it's this. Pay attention to how you feel in your relationship. If you're constantly explaining yourself, walking on eggshells, shrinking to avoid conflict, those aren't signs of love, they're warnings. You don't owe anyone access to your phone, your friendships, or your autonomy to prove loyalty. Trust is not a reward for obedience. It's the foundation, or it's nothing at all. Walking away doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes it means you finally chose yourself. And that choice, that's where everything truly begins.